The air in the conference room at Allied Logistics felt sterile, smelling faintly of lemon polish and stale coffee. Outside, the Seattle sky was its usual muted gray, a soft, persistent drizzle blurring the edges of the city skyline. Inside, the pressure was palpable. This was the final pitch to Allied Logistics, a potential client that could represent a massive win for our consulting firm, doubling the size of our logistics practice overnight. I was part of the core pitch team, the lead on the operational efficiency segment, the part where we detailed how we would actually save them money and streamline their complex supply chain. For weeks, I'd pored over Allied's data, built intricate models, and designed a phased implementation plan that was both ambitious and achievable. My section of the presentation was the engine of our proposal, the technical details, the methodology, the proof that our strategies weren't just theoretical buzzwords but concrete actions with measurable outcomes. I was ready, more than ready. I was excited. Sitting across the polished table were the Allied Logistics team, their COO, a sharp woman named Miss Davies, their head of operations, Mr. Henderson, and a few other key decision-makers. Beside me were my colleagues, David, the senior partner leading the overall pitch, and Richard, my direct boss, the director of business development. Richard was a man who excelled at networking and playing the corporate game but had a frustrating tendency to dismiss the detailed, technical work that actually underpinned our proposals. He had a knack for making you feel slightly less important, less capable, especially if you weren't one of his favored few. And I was definitely not one of his favored few. David started the pitch, delivering a smooth, high-level overview of our firm, our values, and our understanding of Allied's industry challenges. He was good at setting the stage, building rapport. Then it was my turn. I clicked to my first slide, a diagram illustrating Allied's current supply chain bottlenecks based on our preliminary analysis. Based on the data you provided, I began. My voice clear and confident, we've identified 3 key areas where operational inefficiencies are costing you approximately 15% in potential savings annually. Our proposed solution addresses each of these areas with a tailored approach. I dove into the details, optimizing warehouse layouts using spatial analytics, implementing dynamic routing algorithms for their trucking fleet, and integrating a new inventory management system with predictive analytics to reduce stockouts and overstocking. I explained the methodology behind our data collection and analysis, the technology we would deploy, the timeline for implementation, and the projected ROI. I used data, charts, and clear, concise language, translating complex technical concepts into tangible business benefits. I could see Miss Davies and Mr. Henderson nodding, leaning forward, asking clarifying questions that showed genuine interest. I felt a surge of optimism. This was going well. As I finished my section and clicked to David's next slide, there was a brief pause. Miss Davies was about to ask a question, her hand slightly raised. But before she could speak, Richard leaned forward, a slight smile on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. Maya's work on the operational models is, of course, very detailed, Richard said, addressing the Allied team, but his tone felt subtly undermining. He chuckled softly. She's very much in the weeds with the numbers. While that level of detail is admirable for analysis, when it comes to the real-world application, the client relationship, the actual closing of deals, well, let's just say Maya is more comfortable with spreadsheets than with stakeholders. You'll find that winning clients requires a different kind of skill set, a different approach. That's where David and I come in. He paused, letting his words hang in the air. Then, he looked directly at me, that same subtle, dismissive smile on his face. Maya, while your analysis is thorough, perhaps leave the client-facing commentary to those of us with more practical experience in securing these large contracts. You'll never win clients with just data and diagrams. The blood drained from my face. In front of the potential client, in front of David, My boss had just publicly questioned my ability to do a fundamental part of my job to connect with clients and close deals. He hadn't just dismissed my technical contribution. He had dismissed me as a client-facing professional. The room fell silent for a beat. Miss Davies's raised hand slowly lowered. Mr. Henderson's expression hardened slightly. David shifted uncomfortably in his seat. My mind raced. Did he really just say that? Here? Now? I felt a wave of humiliation wash over me, quickly followed by a hot surge of anger. My hands, resting on the table, clenched into fists. I wanted to lash out, to tell him how many hours I'd spent understanding Allied's business, how I'd tailored every part of my presentation to their specific needs, how my data was the reason we were even in this room with a compelling offer. But I was in a client pitch. Professionalism was paramount. I forced myself to take a slow breath, to unclench my hands. I met Richard's gaze, holding it for a moment, trying to convey a silent message that this wasn't over. Then, I turned back to the Allied team, offering a tight, polite smile. My apologies, I said, my voice carefully neutral. As Richard mentioned, I tend to focus on the technical aspects to ensure our proposed solutions are grounded in rigorous analysis and deliver measurable results. Perhaps, Miss Davies, you had a question regarding the implementation timeline? Miss Davies, bless her, seemed to pick up on the awkwardness and my attempt to salvage the situation. She nodded, her expression unreadable, and asked about the phased rollout. David smoothly took over, guiding the conversation back to the broader strategic points. The rest of the meeting was a blur of forced smiles and carefully worded responses. I answered technical questions when prompted, maintaining my professional demeanor, but inside, a cold fury was building. Richard's comment hadn't just been rude. It was a strategic maneuver to sideline me to reinforce his own perceived authority, and to ensure that if the deal closed, the credit would go to him and David, not the person who built the core of the proposal. Leaving the Allied Logistics office, the Seattle drizzle felt colder, more relentless. Back in the car, the silence was heavy. David looked sympathetic but said nothing about Richard's comment. Richard, predictably, acted as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened, chatting about the Mariners game. Back at our office, the post-pitch debrief was brief and anticlimactic. Richard offered generic feedback, mostly praising David and himself. He barely looked at me. As the meeting broke up, he pulled David aside, already talking about the next steps, the follow-up emails, the strategy for closing the deal. I was effectively shut out of the process. I went back to my desk, the words, "You'll never win clients," echoing in my ears. The humiliation was still raw, but the anger had solidified into something hard and determined. He thought I couldn't win clients. He thought I was just a data cruncher, incapable of building relationships and closing deals. I would prove him wrong, and I would do it on my own terms. I knew Richard's game. He wanted to keep me in a box. The technical expert, the analyst, the person who built the engine but wasn't allowed to drive the car. He wanted to take credit for my work while limiting my potential. But I wasn't going to let him. I pulled up my contact list. During my research for the Allied pitch, I had connected with several people within their organization through LinkedIn and industry forums, gathering background information and insights. One name stood out: Mr. Henderson, the head of operations. He had seemed particularly engaged during my presentation, asking intelligent, detailed questions about the technical aspects. I had a feeling he understood the value of what I was proposing on a deeper level than Miss Davies, who was more focused on the executive summary. Finding his direct email took some digging, but I managed it. I drafted an email, carefully choosing my words. I didn't mention Richard or the awkward moment in the meeting. Instead, I referenced our conversation during the pitch, reiterated my confidence in the projected savings, and offered to provide additional detail or answer any lingering technical questions he might have outside of the formal process if necessary. I kept it professional, focused on the value proposition, and offered a direct line of communication. Sending that email felt like stepping off a cliff. I was going behind my boss's back, bypassing the established protocol. If Richard found out and the deal didn't close, I could be in serious trouble. But the alternative, accepting his dismissal and letting him take credit for my work, felt worse. Hours passed. No reply. I tried to focus on other tasks, but my mind kept drifting back to the email, to the pitch, to Richard's condescending smile. Had I made a mistake? Was I being naive? Just as I was about to leave for the day, my inbox pinged. A new email from Mr. Henderson. The subject line was simple. Ray, Allied Logistics pitch follow-up. My heart leaped. I opened it, my hands trembling slightly. The message was brief. Maya, thank you for reaching out. I appreciated your detailed breakdown of the operational plan. I do have a few follow-up questions that weren't addressed in the broader Q&A. Would you be available for a brief call tomorrow morning, say a.m. Pacific time? I'd prefer to keep this informal for now. Prefer to keep this informal for now. That confirmed it. He was interested in talking directly, outside the official channels. The risk I had taken was starting to pay off. I replied immediately, confirming my availability and suggesting a secure video call link. I spent the rest of the evening reviewing my notes, anticipating Mr. Henderson's questions, preparing to dive even deeper into the technical and financial details of the plan. I wasn't just selling a service anymore. I was selling my expertise, my vision for their operations. The call with Mr. Henderson the next morning was incredibly productive. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He had clearly reviewed my presentation again and had specific, insightful questions about the data models, the integration process, and the change management aspects. He was technically savvy and genuinely interested in how our solution would work on the ground. I answered his questions directly, honestly, and with the depth of knowledge that only someone who had built the models could provide. I spoke his language, the language of operations, logistics, and tangible results. I could feel the connection building, a mutual respect based on a shared understanding of the complexities involved. At one point, he paused. Maya, he said, his tone thoughtful. During the pitch yesterday, your colleague, Mr. Sterling, he made a comment about your client-facing skills. Frankly, I found it odd, especially given how effectively you're explaining this now. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. I didn't want to badmouth my boss, but I also didn't want to validate Richard's assessment. Richard has a different focus within the firm, I said carefully. His expertise is in the broader business development strategy. My focus is on ensuring the solutions we propose are technically sound and deliver the promised value. I believe that understanding the client's operational reality in detail is key to building trust and demonstrating value. Mr. Henderson nodded, slowly, seeming to consider my words. I agree, he said. Frankly, your grasp of our operational challenges and your proposed solutions is what impressed me most yesterday. It felt real, actionable. We continued the conversation for another hour, discussing implementation details, potential challenges, and how we could measure success collaboratively. By the end of the call, the dynamic had shifted. It wasn't just a follow-up. It felt like we were already partners, discussing the project as if it were a done deal. Maya, Mr. Henderson said, before we hung up, I'm very impressed. This conversation has addressed all of my remaining concerns and significantly increased my confidence in your firm's ability to deliver. I'll be recommending to Ms. Davies that we move forward with your proposal. I'd like to work directly with you on the operational implementation if we proceed. My heart soared. He was recommending my proposal. He wanted to work with me. The deal wasn't officially closed, but this was the strongest possible indication that it would be. Over the next few days, Mr. Henderson and I exchanged a few more emails, clarifying minor points. I kept these communications entirely separate from my work email and calendar, using a personal account and taking calls on my personal phone. I was operating completely off the grid, a secret negotiation happening parallel to the formal follow-up Richard and David were presumably conducting. Then, the email arrived, a formal communication from Miss Davies to David, copied to Richard and the rest of our pitch team. The subject line read, "Agreement on Consulting Proposal Allied Logistics." They were accepting our proposal. The deal was closed. There was a flurry of excitement in the office. High fives, congratulations, pats on the back. David was beaming, already talking about the press release and the internal announcement. Richard was holding court, accepting congratulations, talking about his strategic approach and building rapport with the client. I stood back, a quiet smile on my face. They thought they had won the deal through their formal process, their high-level strategy. They had no idea that the key decision-maker had been convinced, and the deal effectively closed through a series of informal conversations initiated by the person Richard said would never win clients. Later that day, Richard called me into his office. I expected some grudging acknowledgement of my contribution, perhaps a backhanded compliment. Instead, he looked smug. "Good news, Maya," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Allied Logistics is on board. Great win for the firm." "That's fantastic, Richard," I replied, keeping my tone level. "Yes, well, it just goes to show the importance of having the right people in front of the client," he continued, missing the irony entirely. David and I were able to connect with them on the strategic level, build that trust. Your technical details were a good foundation, of course, but it's the relationship that closes the deal. Something to keep in mind as you develop in your career. He was still doing it, still trying to put me in my box. This was my moment. "Actually, Richard," I said, stepping forward and placing a printed copy of the acceptance email on his desk. "There's something you should know." He looked at the email, then back at me, a flicker of confusion on his face. "While you and David were focusing on the formal follow-up," I continued, my voice calm but firm, "I was having a series of direct conversations with Mr. Henderson, their head of operations. He had some very specific technical questions that he felt weren't fully addressed. We discussed the operational plan in detail, the implementation, the projected ROI. He was particularly interested in the models I built." Richard's smile vanished. His eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about? You went behind my back?" "I went directly to the person who needed to be convinced by the technical merit of the proposal," I corrected him. "The person who would be responsible for implementing our solution and realizing the savings." He appreciated the depth of my understanding and my willingness to address his concerns directly. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "In fact," I added, picking up another printed email from my folder, "Mr. Henderson informed me 2 days ago that he was recommending to Miss Davies that they move forward based on our conversations. He also specifically requested that I be the lead on the operational implementation phase of the project." I handed him the email from Mr. Henderson, the one where he expressed his confidence and requested to work with me. Richard read it, his face turning a shade of red. He contacted you?" Richard stammered, disbelief in his voice. "I reached out to him after the pitch," I clarified. "I sensed he had lingering technical questions and wanted to ensure he had all the information he needed to make a decision. It seems my data and diagrams, combined with a direct conversation, were enough to win this particular client, Richard." I met his gaze, no longer masking my feelings. "You said I'd never win clients. You dismissed my contribution and my ability in front of the client team. But while you were focused on the high-level strategy and taking credit, I was having the conversations that actually closed the deal. Mr. Henderson didn't just sign on with the firm. He signed on because he believed in the plan I presented and the expertise I demonstrated." Richard was speechless, his face a mask of shock and fury. He had been outmaneuvered by the person he had publicly belittled. News of how the Allied Logistics deal really closed spread through the office like wildfire. There was shock, gossip, and a grudging respect for my audacity. David was initially annoyed but quickly realized that a massive deal had been secured, regardless of the unconventional path, and his own position was safe. Richard, however, was furious. He tried to complain to senior management, accusing me of insubordination and violating protocol. But the C-suite saw the bottom line. A multi-million-dollar deal had been closed with a major client, a deal that significantly boosted the firm's revenue and reputation. They couldn't punish the person who brought in the biggest win of the year, especially when the client specifically requested to work with me. Instead, the outcome was the opposite of what Richard intended. My role on the Allied Logistics project was solidified as the lead for the operational implementation, exactly as Mr. Henderson requested. My standing within the firm shifted dramatically. I was no longer just the technical expert. I was the one who got things done, the one who could connect with clients on a deep, valuable level, the one who closed the deal when others were focused on appearances. Richard's authority over me was significantly curtailed. He still held his title, but everyone knew the story. Everyone knew that when it came to winning clients based on the actual value we provided, his methods had failed, and mine, unconventional as they were, had succeeded. He became increasingly isolated, his dismissive attitude now seen not as authority, but as insecurity. The Allied Logistics project was a huge success. Working directly with Mr. Henderson was a great experience. He was a true partner. The operational changes we implemented delivered results even faster than projected, further solidifying my reputation and the firm's relationship with Allied. Looking back, Richard's comment was the catalyst. His attempt to put me down, to limit my potential, backfired spectacularly. He thought he was diminishing me, but he was actually giving me the motivation and the justification to bypass him entirely. He said I'd never win clients, but by going behind his back, leveraging my expertise and building a direct relationship based on trust and value, I didn't just win a client. I won a major victory for myself, proving that competence and connection matter more than corporate posturing and outdated assumptions about who belongs in the room and who gets to close the deal.